I'm a cyber threat intelligence senior consultant at Accenture. My primary role at the company is the lead for resources, so chemicals, mining, oil and gas, and electric utilities. I'm super excited to be here. Please take a moment to look at the legal notice. And this is an overview of what I'll be going over. So we know over the past few decades, there's been a lot of successful cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. So we know that threat actors have the intent, the capability, the customized malware and tools to successfully launch cyber attacks on the oil and gas industry. So today we're gonna go over vulnerabilities in the oil and gas industry, cyber threat groups targeting oil and gas, and some iDefense industry reporting that we do. iDefense is the cyber threat intelligence component of Accenture, and then we're going to end it off with some recommendations. Vulnerabilities in the oil and gas industry. So, the oil and gas industry is very complex. There's different segments, and there's companies that may operate in one segment that don't have assets or operate in another. So the threat landscape could vary. It's broken up into predominantly 3 segments. You have your up, your mid, and your down. So oil field services, it operates within upstream. It provides manufacturing, repair, and other types of services that supports the exploration and production of oil and gas. Threat actors will likely target companies operating in OFS and use them as access vectors to get to the bigger oil and gas companies. In the upstream segment, that's E&P, and that consists of, the surveillancing, the testing, the extraction, and the marketing process of oil and gas. And this is where you have threat actors that are likely backed by nation states who have an interest in this market, and they're looking for IP, confidential business data, anything that could affect oil prices or stock prices. The midstream segment is where you have your transport and your processing of oil and gas. So transport by ship, rail, pipeline, and then processing at petrochemical facilities. And this is where we can get a lot of catastrophic attacks if cyber industrial control systems are manipulated. You have ICS devices that are controlling pressure of pipelines, mixtures of different chemicals. So any type of tampering with that could lead to an explosion, damage to equipment, or possibly loss of life. And in the downstream segment, this is where you have your gas stations, and this is where threat actors are actively targeting fuel merchants and point-of-sale systems for financial gain. So as you can see, once you're working with different companies in these different segments, the threat landscape kind of narrows down a little bit, but what we're going to go over are just the overall threats throughout all segments. Business email compromises, also known as business email spoof attacks. So these attacks are essentially a very tailored spear phishing email. The threat actor compromises an employee's email, an employee of an oil and gas company or a third party, and they use that disguise to send emails out into their network. It could consist of malicious files, malicious links, or a link to a fraudulent payment site. In May of last year, the FBI released a private industry notification on a case study that they did, showing that oil and gas companies in West Texas have been reporting these business email compromises. They also reported spear phishing emails, ransomware attacks, and something I found very interesting, pre-ransomware attacks, where threat actors were threatening to inject ransomware in their systems if they didn't pay X amount of dollars or Bitcoin. So based on this reporting, we know that threat actors are actively using this tactic to target oil and gas companies. Third-party service providers. So we know there's been various incidents where third parties have been compromised. There was an incident in April of 2018 where a breach of a third-party software company resulted in disruption of oil production for 4 oil and gas companies. Now, there are a few reasons why threat actors are targeting third parties. Third parties are kind of like a one-stop shop. Instead of targeting that one oil and gas company, you can target that third party that manages data or processes from several 12+ companies, and your impact is greater that way. Also, third parties tend to be less secure. Maybe they don't have the budget for cybersecurity, so they're easier to breach. And again, it's easier to get to their intended target because a small company within oil field services may not have the money to pay a ransom. But if they can get to $1 billion oil and gas company, then again, they're looking for financial gain if it is a ransomware attack. Cloud services. So this ties into third party, but we know that there's a campaign that's actively targeting cloud service providers and managed service providers. This Cloud Hopper campaign has been active since 2014. In 2018, the FBI indicted 2 threat actors from this group. So they're targeting MSPs, CSPs, and they're looking for IP and confidential business data. So everyone's moving to the cloud. There's nothing wrong with the cloud, but there's a secure way of going about it, understanding how what security policies the CSPs have in place, and then also what's really important here is being especially aware of vendors located in other countries who have different cybersecurity policies that they adhere to. All right, the dark web. So threat actors, they're operating on the dark web to evade attribution while selling and sharing network access, exploits, customized malware, and a whole bunch of other illegal activity. So by a show of hands in here, who has visibility into the dark web, and you'll know if your company is actively being targeted? Okay, we have one in the front. So in March of last year, researchers from Accenture stumbled upon an oil and gas supply company's network access for sale on the dark web. Now, what can an oil and gas company do with this information? They're not being compromised, right? Well, they can do a few things. As I stated before, the adversary will likely target a third party to get to the bigger oil and gas company. So any company that's doing business with the supplier, they're likely a target. So now you know that someone has network access, they have your network access for sale. Also on the dark web, there are threat actors. It's really funny when you're seeing all of them kind of talking to each other. They have customized malware, and they're looking to deploy it on network access. So you're seeing the selling of network access and customized malware, and they're looking to deploy on companies' networks. So they can go into a heightened security posture. Now that you know that this threat is out there, you can do a pen test if you want to see how secure you are, if you want to see where your weak points are and strengthen those. You can increase company training. Everyone knows what a spear phishing email is. A lot of them may not know what a business email compromise is and how to identify that. Another thing the company can do is to share this information with their industry partners. So myself and Stephen Cody, we represent Accenture in the Oil and Natural Gas ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And what's really important is if you see any type of compromise on your system and you share it with your industry, the industry becomes more strengthened as a whole. And we're going to get more into dark web reporting later on in this presentation. Industrial Internet of Things. So these devices, they kind of bridge the gap between the informational technology environment and the operational technology environment. It's important to kind of pull that data from the process control network and it feed business information systems. So, we see the value there, but it also, if it's targeted, it makes it easier for the adversary to traverse into the OT environments. And there has been examples in the past at a major manufacturer in Southeast Asia whose production was halted due to a attack on industrial Internet of Things devices. And this could be anything that's connected to the process control network. It could be a coffee machine, it could be a thermostat, it could be a printer. Industrial control systems. So for oil and gas, one of the major incidents was the 2017 attack on Triton Crisis. This was the first ever attack on a safety instrumented system. A lot of people may look at it as a failed attack or an attempted attack, but there's a few things that we did learn from this incident. And just to kind of do a brief synopsis, I know we're all industry professionals here, and we're probably already familiar with this. But the threat actors, they attempted to inject a remote access Trojan into the device. The system shut down as it was supposed to. So again, it looks like it was a failed attack or an attempted attack. But there are some key takeaways here. The adversary has knowledge of industrial processes. So about 5 years ago when I was giving a similar presentation, the industry consensus was as tools and malwares becoming more robust, then the knowledge of the threat actor decreases. And for certain environments, that's true. You don't need to know anything about the network if you have this modular malware. You deploy it and it does all the work. However, when it comes to industrial control systems and the operational technology environment, you kind of have to understand the safety systems put in place because, again, in order to cause a catastrophic event, you have to target the safety systems in order to potentially shut down a process or cause an explosion. And this is exactly what we saw in the 2016 attack on Ukraine's grid, where they targeted the protective relays in order to trip the circuit breakers and shut the power off. So we're seeing the same thing where they're understanding these processes, they're targeting the safety systems so that they could potentially, and the second takeaway is plan a larger scale attack. So their intended mission wasn't to shut down a safety system, it was to manipulate it, possibly prevent it from reacting while they launch an attack potentially elsewhere. And then another takeaway, they're actively targeting the oil and gas industry. The devices that were attacked, they're used throughout oil and gas. They're used throughout the energy sector. So we know that industrial control systems are vulnerable within oil and gas. So why are attackers developing ICS malware? So it goes beyond just launching a denial of service attack. They're constructing malware that's targeting specific vendors and specific version numbers and specific vulnerabilities or functionalities of industrial control systems. So number one is destruction. Again, with critical infrastructure, there's going to be some type of explosion, damage to equipment that's going to occur. The second is disruption. Shutting down of a process that could result in loss of revenue and just reputation branding with the company. Okay, cyber threat groups targeting oil and gas. This is not an exhaustive list. Depending on the intent of the threat actor, they could target oil and gas just for financial gain. For example, we've seen threat actors who, they're going to launch a ransomware attack. They may not necessarily be targeting the oil and gas industry. They're just targeting any company that's willing to pay. But this list is threat actors that we know have the capability and the intent to target oil and gas. So before we get into that, I created this chart just to kind of show the basic tactics that these threat actors are using. Of course, sometimes they could be using customized malware, customized tools, but for the most part, they're using the oldest trick in the book, spear phishing emails, watering hole attacks, credential gathering, and what we're finding out is that companies, they're not doing the basic security in order to prevent against these things. So for example, with spear phishing, right, the impact is accessing the corporate network. Employee training, yes, but also email filtering. A lot of companies don't have basic email filtering from outside email addresses, so just doing simple things like that can reduce the chances of someone receiving a spear phishing email to even be able to click on it. Then your use of watering hole attacks. There was a threat actor that they created a fake conference page for a company that was holding a conference. So people were registering to it, and there was fake portals, all of that. So I know there's some companies, as a mitigation strategy, they just purchase any type of name that's similar to theirs to prevent threat actors from purchasing it and kind of using it under their disguise. Again, credential gathering. These tools usually target Active Directory, but of course you can set up certain settings within AD that will allow these tools to not gather all the credentials or to escalate their privilege by gathering credentials from key personnel. And then use of zero-day vulnerabilities. Again, 0 days cannot be prevented. However, there are unknown exploits, right? 0 days, you don't know about them. There's unaddressed exploits, so the vendor probably didn't patch it. And then there's the unpatched exploits. There's a patch out there, but you're a little bit slow to getting it patched. So, of course, the ways to kind of to fix that is, to patch as much as you can. Even, in the OT environment, maybe you can't patch in a timely manner. Maybe you have to do it during down periods or maintenance periods, but implementing workarounds. If you know there's a CVE that's going out there, the threat actor knows of that same CVE, knows of the vulnerability, knows of the impact. So now it's kind of a race to see, are you going to patch first before the threat actor exploits it? Okay, so before I get into this, I kind of want to talk about Accenture's naming convention for threat actors. Of course, as a the threat intelligence provider, we do our own research and attribute this research to certain threat actors. So we create our own naming convention for them. But in parentheses, I have the more common industry-wide threat actor names so you can follow along. So the Black Sturgeon Threat Group, they previously launched a targeted campaign against oil and gas companies in the Nigerian basin. And this is something, again, that we've found and researched on the dark web. We found a document in the wild. It asks you to enable editing. And once you click on that, a message pops up. And it says, hey, we're looking to extract crude oil. We want to partner with companies in the Nigerian basin. Please contact me, et cetera. So, of course, this is something that's shared amongst the industry because you know that oil and gas companies operating in the Nigerian basin are being targeted, but these companies are global. So it could be a US-based company that has assets there. So the location of the target doesn't really mean that, hey, I'm not being targeted because I'm not in the Nigerian basin. And of course, some of the TTPs, of course, backdoors, network sniffing, spear phishing emails, and things of that nature. But this is why visibility into the dark web is important, because without this, you wouldn't even know that there's a campaign that's targeting companies operating in that area. Spearlin. So active pretty recently, there's been other cyber threat intelligence providers that's been reporting on their activity, targeting ICS and SCADA systems. This is an embedded message that we did find in the wild as well. And we have researchers that are able to translate different languages. And they're targeting industrial control systems and SCADA systems. So we know that this group, they're active. And with certain groups, they tend to be more active as tensions between two countries rise. So maybe if there's nothing going on, no catastrophic event, no change in foreign policy, you don't really hear from them. They're laying a little bit low. But as soon as there's changes, then we're starting to see an uptick in activity. And again, using the same type of TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, your spear phishing emails, and again, just more active in the height of geopolitics. And that's why geopolitical context is important. The team that I work for under iDefense, it's geopolitical and strategic intelligence. So we have teams that understand what's going on in China, in Iran, in Russia, in Southeast Asia, and kind of using that to understand what's going to spur up cyber threat activity. Because usually it doesn't just happen. There's a why, there's a reason behind it. And I think a lot of companies don't think it's important. They just want to know how to fix it. But understanding the geopolitical context is key in also being more cyber secure. And then we have Xander. They've been active since 2016. They are, previously launched the Triton Crisis attack, and they're obviously targeting the oil and gas sector and as of recent electric utilities. So based on their previous attack, we already know their capabilities. They're able to reverse engineer a proprietary protocol of that industrial control system software. Port scanning, reconnaissance, we know that they have an interest in doing something catastrophic within a petrochemical facility and possibly other parts of oil and gas. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the iDefense oil and gas industry reporting. So we provide different types of threat assessments and threat reportings to clients. So let's start off with leaked credentials. And it goes beyond just handing a list of 100 employees whose credentials got leaked. It's creating that context and letting them understand why a threat actor would target them. So for example, a geospecialist. As I explained before, any type of geographic data, a threat actor will likely want to know if you're talking about extracting oil. It takes years to even find somewhere to extract, and then additional years of testing. So they'll likely target this person if that's the type of information they're after. If they're an automation and SCADA advisor, likely they'll be targeted to get access to a SCADA system. And then if they're a senior cybersecurity architect, they'll be targeted to bypass firewall rules and get past other types of restrictions. So any employee that has leaked credentials, there's a reason and a why that the threat actor will target them, even if it's someone in admin, someone in HR. So dark web. We do a lot of research on the dark web. We have researchers there that are constantly looking for threats to various industries. Since I came on board to Accenture, we've been kind of, pulling a lot of threats to oil and gas, electric utilities on the dark web. So this is just a snapshot. And over the course of 2019, you see there's a lot of undisclosed companies whose network access is for sale. A lot of times they'll say how they got the access. They'll say how many computers they have access to, how many Bitcoin. And a lot of times they'll repost this and they'll say if the network access is sold or not. So it's kind of confirmation that, okay, someone bought it and we're not sure who, but whoever's buying network access for a company on the dark web clearly has ill intent. The bigger question is it one of those threat actors that's saying, hey, I have custom malware I'm trying to deploy? Because then now you know that they actively have something that they're trying to deploy on the network. Of interest, September 16, 2019, there was an undisclosed U.S. oil company's network access being sold for about $3,000 US. So this is separate from the company within oil field services whose network access is for sale. So now they're saying, hey, there's an oil company and their network access is for sale right now. And again, this is important because it's not something that's in, New York Times or CNN where you know that there's this threat out there because someone reported on it. This is stuff that, if you don't have visibility into it, you're not going to know that there's a threat coming from another direction. Okay, recommendations. So cyber hygiene, of course, will always be your first line of defense when it comes to securing your assets and your company against a cyber attack. As you work with the different companies and you find out if they're an up, mid, down, then you can tailor your recommendations. So for example, I've worked with clients who operate mostly in upstream. They don't have any downstream assets. So I'm not going to tell them about threat actors targeting fuel merchants and point of sale systems because they're strictly in E&P. Again, if they don't own any pipelines, so you're tailoring your recommendations based on the segments that they operate in. But these are overall recommendations that a company can take to become more cyber secure. So identify critical systems and perform risk assessments. So this is important when upgrading to different technologies. You're upgrading to the cloud, you're doing SAP, you're just integrating different things within your network. It's kind of good to do a pen test, do a risk assessment to kind of see where your loopholes are. There's an article that I read recently that did a very detailed study on, as these companies were becoming more integrated and technologically advanced, we're actually creating more loopholes for ourselves. So it's good to integrate new technologies, but doing it in a secure way is key. So revise a third-party risk management program. Again, if you're working with a cloud service provider, any type of third party, if they were to get breached, how would that affect you? How do they have a cybersecurity policy in place? How secure is your information, your data? That's key. Implementing MFA, of course. Perform threat hunting exercises to identify evidence of compromises. So, threat actors will lay wait in your network for months before they launch an attack, or if it's cyber espionage, they're there for months just collecting a whole bunch of data. So if you see anything suspicious, it could be an IP or just something that seems a little weird. Doing a threat hunt will, again, it'll help you to identify the compromise and prevent them from getting further. If you have an OT environment, further into the OT environment, or collecting data that could possibly be detrimental to your company. Of course, identity and access management. As a threat actor is in the network, they're moving laterally, they're gaining privileged access, and if they gain credentials of someone that has access to everything when they don't need to, then it's kind of you're making it easier for the threat actor. So just kind of restricting accesses that employees have. Enforcing strong password controls. Believe it or not, I've come across leaked credentials where it was just 4-letter words, where it was just the person's last name. And this was in 2019, so you'd think everyone's been preaching the good gospel of enforcing, strong passwords, but a lot of companies still aren't doing it. So again, basic cyber hygiene, but it just has to be reinforced. Yeah, as a part, threat vulnerability management, ensure regular application of security patches, exactly. So as previously stated, we understand in OT environments, you may not be able to patch right away, but some type of workaround would be nice, but definitely in the IT environment, things should be patched on a regular basis. Use reputable cloud providers, policies, wherever they're operating in, just kind of know that your information is being secure. And then on the IT side, having some type of management of that process, and your IT team should know what's going on with the cloud service providers. And then provide continuous security training and awareness for employees. Again, threat actors are using the oldest trick in the book, spear phishing emails. And if they're still falling for it, then that's a problem. So definitely increasing that, and then increasing other tools, other ways that that employees could be targeted. I do a lot of training, and there hasn't been a lot of training for other companies with watering hole attacks or business email compromise. What is that? What does that look like? And as an employee, how can I identify that? If I'm registering for a conference on my company laptop, how do I know this is a legitimate conference site? Things like that. All right, so as we can see, the oil and gas is very complex, and it gets a little bit more detailed than this, but this is just very high-level oil and gas cyber threat landscape, and again, recommendations on what companies can do to reduce their risks of a cyber attack. I'll take questions now. I have about 3 minutes. It does make sense. So his question was, do I think that there are more cybersecurity incidents or cyber attacks happening in the electric sector versus the oil and gas? I will say this. I know the electric sector is a little bit more secure as far as federal regulations. Oil and gas is starting to catch up. So as far as vulnerabilities, they just tend to be more vulnerable, but I think threat actors are targeting both. They're targeting the energy sector as a whole.
Do you have any thoughts on who the adversary was in the Triton attack?
As far as attribution and what country they came from, no. But if we go back. Yes, so this is the threat actor that's attributed to that attack. And I do kind of want to say something while we're talking about attribution and different countries. Of recent, we realized that that's not important because threat groups, they're using tools from other types of threat groups. So for example, there was a Russian threat group that was using tools from an Iranian threat group. So you're thinking it's one country, but it's not. So this is the name of the threat group that's attributed to this attack. But as far as attribution, I don't know. Yes, absolutely. So the strategy for securing the relationships with third-party providers? Okay, and is this something that we've just been seeing in the past 24 months? Yes. So this has been going on for a long period of time. As if the threat actor isn't targeting the company, they're going to do it by way of third party or supply chain. But as far as our strategy, we're continuing to build it out. So as we progress, we're going to see more testing of devices that you plan on implementing into your environment before automatically just integrating it.